Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. Everything you believe about human progress, about the steady climb from primitive beginnings to modern civilization, rests on an assumption we rarely question. We assume we are the first, the only ones to have reached this far, the pioneers of complexity in a world that was, before us, simple and untouched. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if the ground beneath our cities, the ocean floors we have barely begun to explore, the ancient stories we dismiss as mythology, all whisper a different truth? What if humanity has walked this path before, not once but 6 times, and each time something happened, something powerful enough to erase almost every trace, leaving only fragments, anomalies, and questions that refuse to be answered? Tonight, we are going to explore that possibility, not with certainty, but with curiosity, not as established fact, but as a thought experiment that invites us to see our world differently. We will walk through the evidence that troubles conventional narratives. We will consider the patterns that repeat across cultures and continents, and we will ask ourselves what it would mean if we truly are the 7th iteration of human civilization. Before we begin, let me say this. The story you're about to hear is designed to accompany you into rest. Let the words flow over you like water. If you drift away, that is exactly where you should be. And if you stay awake, let your mind wander through these ideas without judgment, without needing to prove or disprove. Simply wonder. Now, settle deeper into your pillow. Breathe slowly, and let us begin. The conventional story of human civilization is elegant in its simplicity. For millions of years, our ancestors were hunter-gatherers, moving with the seasons, following game, gathering plants. Then, around 12,000 years ago, something shifted. Agriculture emerged, settlements formed, writing developed, cities rose, empires expanded, and here we are now, the inheritors of that unbroken chain. It is a comforting story, linear, progressive, logical, but there are cracks in it, small at first, easy to explain away individually. But when you gather them together, when you lay them side by side, they form a pattern that is harder to dismiss. There are tools found in geological layers where no human tool should exist. Stone blocks fitted with precision that modern engineers struggle to replicate. Astronomical knowledge encoded in ancient monuments that should not have been available to their builders. Flood myths that appear in every corner of the world, separated by oceans and millennia, yet telling remarkably similar stories. And beneath the oceans, in the places where coastlines once existed before the ice melted and the seas rose, there are structures, shapes too regular to be natural, angles too precise to be coincidence, waiting in the dark water like memories we have forgotten how to access. What if these are not anomalies? What if they are breadcrumbs, evidence of something that came before? The idea of cyclical civilizations is not new. Ancient cultures around the world spoke of ages that rose and fell. The Hindus described cycles of creation and destruction spanning vast epochs. The Maya tracked time in great wheels that turned through darkness and light. The Greeks told of golden ages that declined into silver, bronze, and iron before beginning again. We have treated these as myths, symbolic stories, moral tales about the nature of time and human folly. But what if they were trying to tell us something literal? What if they were the descendants of survivors, passing down a warning in the only language that could survive the catastrophe itself? If we are the 7th civilization, it changes everything. It means human history is not a straight line, but a wave. Rising and falling, building and forgetting, reaching heights and then tumbling back to the beginning. It means that progress is not guaranteed. That complexity is fragile, that the world has reset itself before and might do so again. But it also means something else. It means that we are not starting from nothing. That somewhere in our DNA, in our instincts, in the stories we tell and the monuments we build, there are echoes. Memories encoded so deeply we mistake them for intuition. Knowledge that resurfaces without us understanding why. As you lie here tonight, breathing slowly, sinking into rest, consider this possibility, that you are part of a story much older than you imagined, that the ground you walk on has seen this all before, that the stars above watched 6 other versions of humanity climb toward understanding, only to fall silent, and that we, the 7th, have the chance to see the pattern, to understand what our predecessors could not, to break the cycle, or at the very least, to face it with open eyes. Let that thought settle into your mind gently. No need to grasp it. Just let it rest there as we continue deeper into the mystery. Now, we will check out the evidence piece by piece. The ancient structures that defy explanation. The genetic signatures that hint at forgotten migrations. The geological records of catastrophes that wiped the world clean. The stories that survived when nothing else did. And finally, the question of what it all means for us now, standing at the edge of our own uncertain future. But for now, simply breathe. Let your body relax completely, and know that the journey we are on tonight is not about finding final answers. It is about opening ourselves to wonder, to the possibility that history is stranger, deeper, and more mysterious than we have been told. The 7th civilization, that is what we might be. And tonight, we will explore what that truly means. There is something deeply unsettling about objects that appear where they do not belong. A modern coin found in ancient strata would make us question either the coin or the strata. We would search for contamination, for mistakes in dating, for any reasonable explanation that preserves the timeline we understand. But what happens when the explanations run out? When the object remains stubbornly out of place, documented, analyzed, and yet impossible according to everything we think we know. This is the mystery of what researchers call out-of-place artifacts. And if we are truly the 7th civilization, then these objects are not anomalies. They are remnants. The last surviving traces of worlds that came before. Let your breath slow as we explore these mysteries. Feel the weight of your body sinking into the mattress. And listen. In 1912, employees at a coal mine in Oklahoma discovered something strange embedded in the coal they were breaking apart. A metal pot, not corroded beyond recognition, but clearly crafted, with a spout and a handle. The coal itself was from the Carboniferous period, formed over 300 million years ago, long before any accepted version of human history. The workers kept the pot. It was examined, photographed, and then, like so many such discoveries, it faded from public record. Not because it was proven to be a hoax, but because it could not be explained. This pattern repeats across the world. In Russia, miners have extracted gear-like objects from coal seams hundreds of millions of years old. In Illinois, a metallic bell-shaped object was found embedded in coal. In Scotland, a nail was discovered inside a block of sandstone that predated human civilization by millions of years. Each time, the same questions arise: contamination, hoax, misidentification. Sometimes, these explanations hold, but not always. Not when the objects are photographed in place before removal, not when multiple witnesses document the discovery, not when the geological dating is confirmed through several independent methods. If we are the seventh civilization, then these objects begin to make sense. They are not evidence of time travel or alien visitation. They are evidence that intelligent, tool-using humans existed in periods we have assumed were empty of human presence. Perhaps not in the form we recognize now. Perhaps in iterations that rose and fell so long ago that almost everything they made returned to dust and minerals. But not quite everything. Some things survived. Small things, dense things. Objects protected by the very earth that buried them. Consider the implications quietly as you rest. Imagine a civilization rising hundreds of thousands of years ago. They build, they create, they make tools and art and structures. Then catastrophe comes. Floods, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes. The world churns. Sediment buries their works. Layers accumulate, pressure builds. And over unimaginable spans of time, some of what they made becomes part of the rock itself. Millions of years later, we dig. We mine, we crack open the earth, and occasionally we find something that should not be there. The objects themselves are often simple. A nail, a screw, a cup. Nothing that screams advanced technology, but their presence in ancient rock screams something else. That time is deeper than we think. That human hands shaped metal long before we have been willing to admit. There is another category of impossible objects. Not those found in ancient rock, but those that display knowledge their makers should not have possessed. The Antikythera mechanism, recovered from a shipwreck off the coast of Greece, is perhaps the most famous example. It is a complex, geared device, an astronomical calculator of breathtaking sophistication. It tracks the movements of celestial bodies, predicts eclipses, and displays multiple calendars simultaneously. When it was first discovered in 1901, no one understood what it was. It looked too complex, too advanced. For decades it sat in a museum, barely studied, because it did not fit. Only with modern X-ray technology and decades of careful analysis did researchers finally understand its function. The mechanism dates to around 100 BCE. But the level of miniaturization, the complexity of the gearwork, the depth of astronomical knowledge required to design it, all of this suggests a tradition of precision engineering that should not have existed in the ancient world. The conventional explanation is that this was a singular achievement, an isolated genius or workshop that created something extraordinary, and then the knowledge was lost. But what if it was not isolated? What if it was a remnant? The last surviving example of a type of technology that was once more common, created by a civilization that understood the heavens because they had been watching them for far longer than we realize. Let this question float through your mind without grasping for answers. Simply consider it. Feel how it shifts your sense of history. There are other examples. The Baghdad battery, a clay jar with copper and iron components that appears designed to generate an electric current. Discovered in Iraq, dated to around 200 BCE. Some researchers dismiss it as a storage vessel. Others have successfully used reconstructions to generate voltage. In India, an iron pillar stands in Delhi, erected around 400 CE. It is made of remarkably pure iron that has resisted corrosion for over 1,500 years, something that modern metallurgy struggles to explain. The composition suggests a level of smelting technology that should not have been available at that time. In Egypt, a wooden model of what appears to be a glider was found in a tomb dating to 200 BCE, It has aerodynamic properties. When scaled up and tested, it flies. Each of these objects sits at the edge of what we can comfortably explain. Individually, they can be dismissed. Collectively, they form a pattern. If we are the seventh civilization, then perhaps these are not anomalies, but survivors. The rare pieces that made it through the collapse of earlier worlds. Not the most impressive creations of those civilizations necessarily, but the most durable. The ones that happen to be in the right place, made of the right materials, to last. Breathe deeply now. Let your muscles release any remaining tension. And imagine this. Imagine that every few 100,000 years, a human civilization rises. It develops language, art, technology. It reaches a certain level of complexity. Then, geological forces, climate shifts, or cosmic events trigger a collapse so complete that almost everything disappears. The survivors scatter. They carry fragments of knowledge, but without the infrastructure to support it, much of that knowledge becomes useless. Stories replace science. Myths replace history. And when their descendants rebuild, they do so from a foundation that looks primitive. But occasionally, just occasionally, they recreate something they remember from before, something their ancestors made. And they do not fully understand how or why it works, but they build it anyway, because the memory is there, buried deep. This would explain the sudden appearance of complex technologies in the archaeological record, not as inventions springing from nowhere, but as rediscoveries, as humanity remembering what it once knew, the stones, the tools, the devices that should not exist. They are not proof, but they are questions. And questions, when they accumulate, begin to form their own kind of answer. Rest now. Let these mysteries settle into the background of your thoughts. In the next chapter, we will leave behind small objects and turn our attention to something far larger. Structures so massive, so precisely built, that they challenge our understanding of what ancient peoples could achieve. But for now, simply be. Let sleep come if it calls. Let your mind drift, and know that the mysteries we are exploring together are not meant to be solved tonight, only contemplated, only wondered at. The seventh civilization, if that is what we are, walks on ground that has seen all of this before. And that ground still holds secrets. There are places on Earth where stone has been shaped in ways that seem to transcend the capabilities of the cultures we believe created them. Not small objects now, but monuments. Structures weighing thousands of tons. Blocks fitted so precisely that a piece of paper cannot slide between them. Alignments so exact they track celestial movements across millennia. These are the megaliths, the pyramids, the temples carved from single mountains, the walls that have stood for thousands of years, surviving earthquakes that destroyed everything built around them. If we are the seventh civilization, then these structures take on new meaning. They are not the first achievements of early peoples. They are the last echoes of something much older. The final, desperate attempts to preserve knowledge before the darkness came. Let your breathing become slow and regular. Feel the bed supporting every part of your body, and travel with me now to the places where stone speaks of forgotten mastery. We begin in Egypt, not because it is the oldest, but because it is the most familiar. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as perhaps the most studied structure in human history. Millions of visitors, countless researchers, theories stacked upon theories, and yet mysteries remain. The pyramid is aligned to true north, with an accuracy of just a few arc minutes. This level of precision requires sophisticated astronomical observation and mathematical calculation. The ratio of its height to its base perimeter approximates pi. The ratio of its height to half its base approximates the golden ratio. These relationships appear too exact to be accidental. Inside, the chambers and passages are constructed from blocks weighing up to 70 tons, lifted and positioned with tolerances measured in millimeters. The king's chamber is built from granite blocks, each weighing dozens of tons, transported from quarries over 500 miles away. The conventional explanation is that this was achieved through sheer human effort. Ramps, ropes, copper tools, and vast labor forces. And certainly, human determination is capable of extraordinary things. But there are problems with this explanation. No ramps of sufficient size have ever been found. The copper tools available at the time struggle to cut granite. The timeline for construction seems impossibly compressed. And perhaps most tellingly, the older layers of Egyptian stonework are more precise than the later layers, not less. This is backwards. Technology should improve over time, not decline. Unless the earliest builders were not inventing, unless they were remembering, or copying something even older. Beneath the Giza Plateau, ground-penetrating surveys have detected anomalies, chambers and passages that do not appear on any map, sealed spaces that have never been opened, and the bedrock itself shows signs of water erosion, which should not exist in a desert climate unless the Sphinx and its surroundings are far older than Mosè officially acknowledged. If we are the seventh civilization, then perhaps the pyramids were not built by the dynastic Egyptians at all. Perhaps they found them already ancient, already weathered, and restored them, added their own inscriptions, claimed them as their own, as any culture would when discovering something magnificent left by predecessors they did not understand. The memory of who truly built them would fade, but the structures themselves would remain. Let this idea rest in your mind gently as we travel across the ocean. In Peru, high in the Andes, the fortress of Sacsayhuaman stands above the city of Cusco. Its walls are built from limestone blocks, some weighing over 200 tons. They are fitted together in complex, interlocking patterns, with no two blocks the same shape. The precision is extraordinary. Edges align perfectly. Surfaces meet without gaps. The blocks are shaped in 3 dimensions, with inward-facing angles that lock them together like a puzzle, designed by someone who understood stress, load distribution, and seismic stability. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived, they asked the Inca who built these walls. The Inca said they did not know. They said the walls were there before their empire existed. They said their ancestors found them and built upon them, but the oldest and largest stones came from a time before memory. The Spanish did not believe them, but the evidence supports the Inca's account. The stonework at Sacsayhuaman exists in layers. The oldest blocks at the bottom are massive and precisely fitted. The newer blocks on top are smaller, cruder, clearly added later. The same pattern appears throughout Peru, at Ollantaytambo, at Machu Picchu, at countless sites across the Andes. The oldest layers are the most sophisticated. The newest are the least. This is the signature not of a civilization rising, but of a civilization trying to maintain something it inherited and slowly losing the knowledge to do so. If we are the seventh civilization, then what the Inca told the Spanish was the truth. They found these structures. They did not build them. They were the inheritors of a legacy from a world that came before, a world that understood stone in ways we have only begun to rediscover. Breathe deeply. Let the mystery of these stones wash over you without trying to solve it. feel the weight of deep time. In Lebanon, the ancient site of Baalbek contains some of the largest worked stones ever discovered. The Temple of Jupiter stands on a platform built from blocks called the Trilithon, 3 massive stones each weighing approximately 800 tons. Nearby, still in the quarry, lies the stone of the pregnant woman, weighing over 1,000 tons. It was cut, shaped, and prepared for transport, but never moved. No crane in the modern world can lift 1,000 tons. No ancient culture, according to accepted history, had the technology to quarry, move, and precisely place such stones. And yet, there they are. The conventional explanation suggests a lost technique, a clever use of levers and rollers and thousands of workers. Perhaps. But no one has successfully demonstrated how this would work in practice. The mathematics of moving such weight over uneven terrain and then lifting it into place with millimeter precision remain elusive. If we are the 7th civilization, then perhaps Baalbek was built using knowledge we have not yet recovered. Not magic, not aliens, but engineering principles that a previous iteration of humanity understood, and we have forgotten. Knowledge can be lost completely in a single generation if it is not written down, if the people who hold it die suddenly, if the schools and apprenticeships and transmission of skill are interrupted by catastrophe. When civilization rebuilds, the survivors remember that great things were possible. They see the ruins. They try to imitate them. But without the underlying knowledge, they can only approximate. They build smaller, simpler. They do what they can with what they remember. And over time, even the memory fades, until all that remains are the stones themselves, standing as silent witnesses to what was once possible. Let your mind drift now through these ancient places. Egypt, Peru, Lebanon, and dozens of others we have not mentioned. Stonehenge, Göbekli Tepe, the temples of Malta, the Moai of Easter Island, the submerged structures off the coast of Japan. Each one a mystery, each one suggesting knowledge and capability that should not have existed when they were supposedly built. Individually, they are marvels. Collectively, they are a pattern that whispers of something older, something forgotten, something that, if we are the 7th civilization, was built by the ones who came before us. As you rest tonight, let yourself feel the immensity of these structures. Imagine standing before a wall of 200-ton blocks, fitted together flawlessly. Imagine the knowledge required to conceive such a thing, let alone execute it. And then imagine that knowledge disappearing, erased by flood, fire, or time, until all that remains are the stones themselves and the questions they raise. The 7th civilization, if that is what we are, inherited a world already carved and shaped by hands we do not remember. And that world still speaks, if we are quiet enough to listen. Water covers most of our planet, and for most of human history, we have barely explored what lies beneath its surface. The ocean floor is less mapped than the surface of Mars. Vast regions remain completely unknown, their depths unsurveyed, their secrets held in darkness and pressure. But in the places we have looked, we have found something strange. Structures that should not exist. Formations too regular to be natural. Shapes that suggest intention, design, and purpose. If we are the 7th civilization, then the oceans are not empty. They are graveyards, holding the drowned remains of worlds that rose when the seas were lower, when the coastlines were miles farther out, when land connected continents that are now separated by deep water. Let your body settle completely now. Feel the darkness behind your eyelids. and descend with me beneath the waves to the places where stone structures wait in silence. 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, the oceans were dramatically lower than they are today. Sea levels have risen by more than 400 feet as glaciers melted and water returned to the basins. This rise was not gradual and steady. It came in pulses, in sudden surges as ice dams broke and vast lakes drained into the sea. Coastlines that had been stable for thousands of years were inundated in decades, sometimes in days. Entire regions, fertile and inhabited, vanished beneath the waves. If advanced civilizations existed during that period, their cities would have been built on the coasts. Ports for trade, harbors for fishing, river deltas where agriculture flourished. And when the water came, those cities would have drowned. Their ruins would not be on the land we walk today. They would be underwater, covered by sediment, hidden in the darkness beyond the reach of casual discovery. This is not speculation. This is simple geography. And when we finally send sonar and submersibles to survey these drowned coastlines, we find exactly what we would expect if this hypothesis were true. Off the coast of Japan, near the island of Yonaguni, divers have explored a massive underwater formation that has sparked decades of debate. It is a terraced structure with flat surfaces, right angles, and straight edges. Steps descend from level to level. Channels are carved with apparent purpose. A road or pathway runs along one edge. Some geologists argue it is entirely natural, a product of erosion and fracturing. Others, including the first diver to extensively explore the site, argue that while the base may be natural rock, it has been modified by human hands. The angles are too precise, the symmetry too consistent, the features too organized. The formation lies at a depth that would have been above water during the last ice age. If it was modified by humans, they would have done so before the seas rose, more than 10,000 years ago. No known civilization in the region existed at that time. At least, not according to the accepted timeline. If we are the seventh civilization, then Yonaguni is not an anomaly. It is evidence. A fragment of the sixth civilization, drowned when the world changed. Breathe slowly. Let the image of that underwater structure settle in your mind. Stone carved beneath the sea, waiting in darkness. In the Mediterranean, off the coast of Cyprus, sonar surveys have detected formations that resemble walls, foundations, and even structures that might be towers. They lie at depths corresponding to coastlines from the end of the last ice age. Near the Greek island of Zakynthos, pavements of flat stone stretch across the ocean floor in patterns too regular for natural geology. Archaeologists initially dismissed them, then investigated, and found that while some features might be geological, others remain unexplained. Off the coast of India, near the Gulf of Cambay, acoustic imaging revealed what appeared to be grid-like structures, streets, and building foundations at significant depth. Artifacts dredged from the site were dated to nearly 10,000 years old, far older than any known civilization in the region. The discovery was controversial. Funding dried up, access became restricted, and the structures remain largely unexplored, sitting in darkness as debates continue about their origin. Each of these sites exists in a state of uncertainty, not proven to be human-made, but not conclusively natural either. They occupy a liminal space, too strange to ignore, too threatening to the accepted narrative to embrace. If we are the seventh civilization, then this uncertainty is intentional, not as conspiracy, but as caution. Because if we acknowledge that advanced human societies existed 12,000 years ago, we must rewrite history. We must confront the possibility that civilization is not a recent achievement, but a recurring pattern. And we must ask what destroyed those earlier worlds. Let your breath flow naturally now, without effort. Feel yourself sinking deeper into rest. And consider this. If the coastlines of 12,000 years ago were inhabited by complex societies, by people who built ports and cities and monuments, then the flood myths that appear in every culture are not myths at all. They are memories. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes a flood that covered the world. The biblical story of Noah tells of rising waters that drowned all but a chosen few. Hindu texts describe the Matsya avatar saving humanity from a deluge. Aboriginal Australians speak of the time when the sea rose and swallowed the land. Polynesian stories tell of islands sinking beneath waves. These stories are separated by geography, language, and time. They should not be similar, and yet they are. The details vary, but the core remains consistent. Water rises, land disappears, most people die, a few survive, and those survivors carry forward the memory of what was lost. For generations, scholars treated these as allegories, moral tales about divine, punishment, or natural cycles. But geology supports the literal reading. The seas did rise, coastlines were inundated, entire regions vanished beneath the waves. If we are the seventh civilization, then the flood myths are not religious allegories. They are historical accounts, passed orally through hundreds of generations, distorted by time and translation, but rooted in actual events that our ancestors witnessed and survived. The drowned cities beneath the oceans are the physical evidence of what the myths describe in story. And if those cities existed, if they were built by organized societies with engineering knowledge and cultural complexity, then we must accept that human civilization did not begin after the floods. It existed before them. We are not the first. We are the latest. The seventh in a long line of societies that rose, flourished, and then were forced to start over. Stone foundations, carved channels, harbor walls, submerged plazas where people once gathered. All of it silent now, covered in sediment, home to fish and coral and the slow currents of deep water. But not gone, only hidden. What force could be powerful enough to erase entire civilizations so completely that only fragments remain? What pattern governs the rise and fall of human worlds? To understand if we are truly the seventh civilization, we must understand what ended the first six. And to understand that, we must look beyond human history into the deep rhythms of the planet we inhabit. Let your body release all remaining tension. Feel yourself held by the bed, by gravity, by the earth itself. And breathe slowly as we explore the cycles that govern worlds. Earth is not a static place. It moves, breathes, and transforms itself constantly. Continents drift. Magnetic poles wander and occasionally flip. The planet's axis tilts and wobbles in predictable cycles. Ice ages come and go. Volcanic activity surges and subsides. Ocean currents shift. Climate patterns reorganize themselves. Most of these changes happen too slowly for humans to notice. We live 70 or 80 years. We see only a tiny slice of geological time. To us, the world seems stable, unchanging, permanent, but it is not. There are cycles in nature that repeat every 20,000 years, every 100,000 years, every few 100,000 years. And when these cycles align, when multiple forces converge, the world changes dramatically and suddenly. These are the moments when civilizations fall. One of the most important cycles is the Milankovitch cycle, named after the scientist who described how Earth's orbit and axial tilt change over time. These changes affect how much sunlight different parts of the planet receive, which in turn drives ice ages and warm periods. Every 100,000 years or so, Earth enters a period of extreme glaciation. Ice sheets expand across the northern continents. Sea levels drop as water is locked in glaciers. Climate patterns shift. And then, suddenly, the ice melts. Not slowly over millennia, but rapidly over centuries or even decades. The melting releases unimaginable quantities of water. Sea levels rise by hundreds of feet. Coastlines are inundated. River valleys flood. Entire ecosystems are rearranged. Any civilization that had built its cities on the coasts, as most civilizations do, would be wiped out almost completely. This is not theory. This is documented geology. We know the ice ages happened. We know the melting happened. We know the seas rose. What we have not fully accepted is what this means for human civilization. If humans existed during the glacial periods, if they built complex societies on the exposed continental shelves when the seas were lower, then those societies would have been destroyed when the ice melted. The survivors would have fled inland, carrying whatever knowledge they could, trying to preserve what they remembered. But without the infrastructure, without the cities and schools and libraries, much of that knowledge would fade within a few generations. And when the world stabilized again, their descendants would rebuild. But they would be starting over, with only fragments of the old world to guide them. This cycle has repeated throughout human existence. Not every 100 years, not every 1,000, but every 100,000 years or so, predictably, relentlessly. If we are the seventh civilization, then we are the seventh to rise after such a collapse. But glaciation is not the only force that resets civilizations. Volcanic eruptions, when large enough, can alter the climate of the entire planet. The eruption of Mount Toba in Indonesia, approximately 75,000 years ago, ejected so much ash and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere that it triggered a volcanic winter lasting years, possibly decades. Temperatures dropped, sunlight dimmed, plant life withered, animal populations collapsed, and human populations, which genetic evidence suggests were already small, were reduced to perhaps a few thousand individuals worldwide. This is called a population bottleneck, a moment when humanity came perilously close to extinction. If a complex civilization existed before Toba, it would not have survived. The ash would have buried its cities. The cold would have killed its people. The darkness would have ended its agriculture. Only the most adaptable groups, those who could hunt and forage and move constantly, would have lived. And they would have carried forward only the most essential knowledge: how to make fire, how to find food, how to survive. Everything else would be lost. There is another force, one we are only beginning to understand: cosmic impacts. Approximately 12,800 years ago, something struck Earth or exploded in the atmosphere. The evidence appears in a layer of sediment found across the northern hemisphere, containing unusual concentrations of platinum, microspherules, and nanodiamonds, materials associated with extraterrestrial impacts. This event coincides with the Younger Dryas, a period when the warming trend at the end of the last ice age suddenly reversed. Temperatures plummeted, glaciers advanced again, megafauna that had survived the ice age went extinct, and any human societies that were beginning to sedimnandin Flourish would have been thrown back into survival mode. The impact theory remains controversial, but the evidence continues to accumulate. And if it is true, it means that advanced civilizations could be ended not just by earthly cycles, but by events from space. A comet fragment, an asteroid, forces beyond prediction or control. If we are the seventh civilization, then perhaps the previous six were ended by different causes. One by ice, another by volcanic winter, a third by cosmic impact, a fourth by rising seas. Each collapse triggered by forces that operate on geological timescales, forces that care nothing for human achievement or ambition. These forces are patient. They wait, and when the cycles align, they reset the world. The rhythm of catastrophe is not a punishment. It is not divine judgment or cosmic malice. It is simply the nature of living on a dynamic planet in a vast universe filled with debris. Earth breathes in cycles measured in tens of thousands of years. And when it exhales, civilizations end. But here is what matters. Here is what changes everything if it is true. The collapses are not total. They do not erase humanity. They erase complexity. They erase infrastructure. They erase the accumulated knowledge stored in libraries and institutions and the minds of specialists. But they do not erase people. Not completely. Survivors remain. Small groups scattered across the world, carrying fragments of memory, and those survivors rebuild. Slowly, carefully, starting almost from nothing, but not quite nothing. Because the memory persists. In stories, in symbols, in the instinct to look up at the stars and wonder, in the drive to build monuments that will outlast the builders. If we are the seventh civilization, then we carry within us the echoes of 6 previous attempts. 6 times humanity climbed toward understanding. 6 times the world reset. And 6 times survivors passed forward what they could. We are the inheritors of that accumulated resilience, that stubborn refusal to stay down, that drive to reach beyond survival toward meaning, beauty, and understanding. Rest now with this thought. Feel the stability of the present moment, and know that whatever cycles turn in the deep time of Earth, this moment, right now, is yours. Safe, quiet, peaceful. There is a library inside you, not made of paper or stone, but of molecules. A code written in 4 chemical letters, repeated 3 billion times, containing the instructions for building a human being. This is your DNA. And within it, hidden among the genes that determine your eye color and height and metabolism, there may be something else. Evidence of the civilizations that came before. If we are truly the 7th civilization, then the survivors of the previous 6 did not just pass down stories. They passed down themselves, their genes, their adaptations, the biological signatures of catastrophes they endured and barely survived. And those signatures are still there, waiting to be read. Let your breathing become effortless now. Feel your body completely at rest, and journey with me into the microscopic world where history is written in a code more durable than any monument. Human genetics is a relatively new science. We have only been able to read the full human genome for a couple of decades, and we are still learning what most of it does. Large sections remain mysterious, labeled as junk DNA or non-coding regions, assumed to serve no purpose. But nature rarely keeps things that serve no purpose. And as our understanding deepens, we are discovering that these mysterious regions do have functions. They regulate other genes. They respond to environmental conditions. They carry information across generations, and some of them appear to be very, very old. There are genetic markers in modern humans that do not match the patterns we would expect from a simple, linear migration out of Africa, followed by gradual population growth. Instead, they suggest something more complex. Multiple population bottlenecks. Periods when human numbers dropped dramatically, then recovered. Mixing between groups that should have been isolated, and adaptations that appeared too quickly to be explained by random mutation alone. These patterns have puzzled geneticists for years. The conventional explanation involves ice ages, migration routes, and interbreeding with archaic human species like Neanderthals and Denisovans. But there is another explanation, one that fits if we are the seventh civilization. The survivors of each collapse would have been small groups, isolated from each other, forced to adapt rapidly to dramatically changed conditions. They would have experienced severe genetic bottlenecks. And when conditions improved, these groups would have expanded again, carrying the genetic signatures of their survival. Over hundreds of thousands of years, across 6 cycles of collapse and recovery, the human genome would accumulate layers of these signatures. Adaptations for surviving cold, adaptations for surviving heat, adaptations for surviving on coastlines that repeatedly drowned, adaptations for processing different foods when familiar sources disappeared. All of it still there, written in the code, waiting to be recognized for what it is. Let this idea rest gently in your awareness. No need to grasp it. Simply let it be. There are specific genetic variants that tell intriguing stories. Some populations carry genes that allow them to function at high altitude, where oxygen is scarce. The Tibetan Plateau is one of the harshest environments for human habitation, yet people have lived there for thousands of years. They have genetic adaptations that help their blood carry oxygen more efficiently. These adaptations appeared remarkably quickly in evolutionary terms, too quickly for standard natural selection to easily explain. But if their ancestors had already developed these adaptations during a previous cycle, during a time when atmospheric conditions were different, or when they lived in different high-altitude regions now lost to time, then the genes were not new. They were reawakened, reactivated by environmental pressures that resembled conditions from an earlier age. Other populations carry genes related to diving and underwater breath-holding. The Bajau people of Southeast Asia can hold their breath for many minutes and dive to significant depths repeatedly. They have genetic variations that affect spleen size and other factors related to oxygen management. Why would such specific adaptations exist? The conventional answer is that they developed because these people relied on diving for food. But if their ancestors lived on coastlines that were later flooded, if they were maritime people who survived the rising seas by adapting to life on and in the water, then these genes are not recent adaptations. They are ancient ones, preserved through the collapse and carried forward by descendants who never forgot the sea. Breathe deeply now. Feel the air filling your lungs. And consider that your ability to do so, the efficiency of your metabolism, the way your body responds to stress, all of it may be shaped by events that happened but long before recorded history. There is another layer to this mystery, epigenetics. Your genes are not just a fixed code. They can be turned on or off, expressed more strongly or more weakly, in response to environmental conditions. And these changes can sometimes be passed to your children. This means that experiences lived by your ancestors, trauma they endured, conditions they survived, can leave marks on the genome that affect you generations later, even if you never experienced those conditions yourself. If your ancestors survived a volcanic winter, if they endured years of darkness and cold and starvation, their bodies would have responded. Genes related to metabolism, stress response, and immune function would have been activated in specific patterns, and some of those patterns would have been passed down, not consciously, not as memory, but as biological preparation, as a kind of cellular memory that says, "This happened before, be ready." Studies have shown that descendants of people who survived famines have different metabolic patterns than those whose ancestors did not. Descendants of trauma survivors show different stress responses. The body remembers what the mind forgets. If we are the seventh civilization, then the collapses that ended the previous six were traumatic events of unimaginable scale. Entire worlds ending, populations reduced to tiny fractions, survivors struggling against cold, hunger, darkness, and loss. Those experiences would have left deep marks on the genome, marks that are still there, still influencing how our bodies respond to stress, how we react to environmental changes, how we adapt to new conditions. We carry the memory of catastrophe in our cells, not as fear necessarily, but as preparedness, as resilience, as the biological echo of ancestors who faced the worst and survived. Let that thought settle into your awareness as you rest. Feel the deep wisdom of your body, the billions of years of evolution encoded in every cell, the thousands of generations that came before you, each one surviving. There is one more piece to this genetic story, one that brings us full circle to where we began. In recent years, researchers have discovered genetic variants that affect how people process and remember spatial information, how they navigate, how they orient themselves in unfamiliar landscapes, how they recognize patterns in the environment. These variants are not evenly distributed. They appear more frequently in certain populations, particularly those with oral traditions that emphasize long-distance travel, celestial navigation, and the memorization of complex geographical knowledge. The Aboriginal Australians, the Polynesian navigators, certain groups in Central Asia, all carry higher frequencies of these variants. These are the descendants of people who had to move, who had to remember routes across vast distances, who had to preserve geographical knowledge across generations without writing. If we are the seventh civilization, then these are the descendants of survivors, people whose ancestors had to flee rising seas, advancing ice, or volcanic devastation. People who had to remember where the safe places were, where the resources could be found, how to read the stars for direction. That knowledge became genetic, not the specific memories, but the capacity to remember, to navigate, to orient. And it is still there, still active, still shaping how their descendants interact with the world. Rest now, let your mind drift, and feel the deep continuity of human existence, the way we are connected, not just to our parents and grandparents, but to people who lived tens of thousands of years ago. People whose experiences shape the very code that makes us who we are. If we are the seventh civilization, then we are not separate from the six that came before. We are their continuation, their children, born after the long darkness, carrying forward the memory of what was lost and the hope of what might be rebuilt. We have traveled together through deep time tonight, through ancient stone and drowned cities, through genetic codes and catastrophic cycles, through the possibility that we are not the first humans to reach toward complexity, but the seventh. Now, as sleep draws closer, we return to the beginning, to the question itself. not to answer it definitively, but to sit with it gently, to let it become a companion rather than a puzzle to solve. What if we are truly the seventh civilization? If you're following this deeply, kindly like, share, and subscribe. The truth is, we may never have absolute proof. The evidence is fragmentary by its nature, scattered across continents and buried beneath oceans and encoded in forms we are only beginning to understand. Some of what we have explored tonight is speculation. Some is established science. Some exist in the uncertain space between, where data points toward possibilities that challenge accepted narratives, but cannot yet prove them conclusively. And that is okay, because the value of this question is not in its answer. The value is in asking it, in opening ourselves to the possibility that history is stranger, deeper, and more mysterious than we have been taught. When we ask if we are the seventh civilization, we are really asking several other questions beneath the surface. We are asking about human resilience, about our capacity to survive and rebuild, even after catastrophic loss. We are asking about time, about whether the progress we see in our own lives and generations is part of a larger pattern that cycles across scales we can barely imagine. We are asking about humility, about whether we are truly unprecedented or simply the latest iteration of something that has been attempted before. We are asking about responsibility, about what we owe to the future and how we should prepare for forces beyond our control. And we are asking about connection, about whether we are alone in time or part of a vast, unbroken chain of human experience that stretches from the deep past into the deep future. These are good questions, important questions, questions worth living with even if we never fully answer them. If we are the seventh civilization, what does that mean for how you live tomorrow? It might mean looking at ancient ruins with new curiosity, wondering not just how they were built, but what their builders were trying to preserve. It might mean paying attention to the stories passed down in your own family, your own culture, recognizing that oral traditions carry information that written records often miss. It might mean taking climate change and environmental instability more seriously, not as abstract future threats, but as the early signs of cycles that have played out before. It might mean thinking about what you would want to preserve if everything had to be rebuilt. What knowledge matters most? What wisdom is worth encoding in durable forms? Or it might simply mean feeling a deeper connection to the earth itself, to the long cycles of ice and warmth, to the rhythm of catastrophe and renewal, to the planet that has held so many versions of human civilization and will hold many more. Let these possibilities rest in your mind gently, without pressure. You do not need to do anything with them tonight. Simply let them be. The question of whether we are the seventh civilization is ultimately a question about perspective, about how we locate ourselves in time, about whether we see ourselves as the beginning or the middle, as the first or the latest, as unprecedented or part of a pattern. And perhaps the answer is less important than the shift in consciousness that comes from asking. When we consider that we might be the seventh, we become humble. We recognize that our achievements, impressive as they are not miracles, but the natural expression of human intelligence given time and stability. We become curious. We start to look at the past differently, searching for traces of what came before rather than assuming the conventional timeline is complete. We become thoughtful. We recognize that stability is temporary, that complexity is fragile, that the systems we depend on could collapse more quickly than we imagine. And we become hopeful. Because if humanity has survived 6 collapses and rebuilt 6 times, then we are fundamentally resilient. We are capable of enduring far more than we think. We are part of something that cannot be permanently erased. These shifts in perspective are valuable regardless of whether the hypothesis is literally true. They change how we see ourselves and our place in the world. They connect us to the deep past and the deep future. They make us part of something larger than our individual lives. And that connection, that sense of belonging to a story that spans geological time, is perhaps what we need most in our fragmented modern world. As you drift towards sleep now, let the question remain open. Do not try to answer it. Simply hold it lightly. Let it change you in subtle ways, deepening your sense of time, broadening your perspective, connecting you to ancestors you will never know and descendants you will never meet. The 7th civilization. Perhaps we are, perhaps we are not. But in asking the question, we have already changed. We have already stepped outside the narrow corridor of accepted history and glimpsed something larger. A pattern that repeats, a resilience that endures, a story that continues no matter how many times it seems to end. And that glimpse is enough. Let sleep come now. Let your breathing become effortless. Let your mind drift into dreams where time moves differently, where past and future blur, where the 7th civilization meets the 1st and the 8th in spaces beyond words. You are part of an ancient story. You carry in your genes and your instincts the memory of catastrophes survived and worlds rebuilt. You stand on ground that has seen all of this before and will see it all again. And in this moment, you are here, breathing, resting, connected to everything that came before and everything that will come after. The question remains open. The mystery remains. And that is exactly as it should be. The 7th civilization sleeps tonight in millions of beds across the world, each person carrying the story forward, each person part of the continuation, and you are one of them. But tonight, none of that matters. Tonight, there is only breath and rest, and the quiet turning of the earth through space. Thank you for joining us on this journey through deep time. If this exploration resonated with you, consider dropping a like and subscribe. Until we meet again, rest deeply and dream well.